Hi, and welcome to Clarkenomics. In this video, we're going to talk about the balance of payment system. Specifically, we're going to talk about the current account. All right, so the balance of payments. The balance of payments is a system that countries of the world maintain, and the purpose of a balance of payment system is relatively straightforward. It is measuring money flowing into and out of a country, which money does all the time, every day, right? So the balance of payment system tracks money flowing into a country, it tracks money flowing out of a country. And balance of payment systems are made up of two parts. The first part is what we call in the United States, we call it the current account, which we're going to focus on in this video. And then the other part of it is what's called, it used to be called the capital account. We call it today the financial account, and that is the topic of another video. So these are the two sides of the balance of payment system. And although all countries of the world have a balance of payment system, we're going to focus specifically on that of the United States of America. So, the current account. It's measuring money, sure, but what money is it measuring? The current account is measuring the flow of payments for products. Now remember, products can be goods or services, right? Goods are tangible physical things you can hold. Services are actions performed. They're both examples of products. And products can be made in a country and sent to another country. We call those exports. Or products can be made in some other country and sent into a country, right? We call those imports, right? One country's exports or another country's imports. So what we're looking at in the current account is payments for those products, right? So when we pay for imports from another country or when we get paid for exporting stuff from our country, that's all tracked in the current account. So this account, like all accounts, can have something called a balance. So the current account balance is what we sometimes call the trade balance. They're slightly different things, but I'm not going to split hairs here. We also call them something you might be familiar with from another video, net exports, or NX. Now you might remember this from a video where we talked about gross domestic product, GDP, and the expenditure method for calculating GDP is C plus I plus G plus NX. So this is the same NX that we were looking at there. And if you don't remember or you haven't seen that video, NX is equal to exports minus imports, right? So we're looking at the dollar value of the stuff that we make and ship to other countries, exports, minus the dollar value of things that we have purchased from other countries, imports. So NX is exports minus imports, right? The value of those things. We're not measuring like how many t-shirts were made in another country and imported to the US. We're looking at the dollar value of those things, right? That's the payment part of this. We're measuring the flow of payments for products. Now, a trade deficit. All of this stuff is stuff that you'll read about in the news all the time. It's not always the most exciting thing to study, but it's good to know about because, again, when these things appear in the news, politicians, and other people in charge try to use that information to convince you of one thing or the other. And so it's good for you to know how these things work so that you can kind of sift through it and find out if you're being misled or what the real deal is. That's like the basic reason you should understand this. Of course, if you go into any kind of field pertaining to economics or policy, you should have a much more sophisticated understanding of this too. Anyway, trade deficit. A trade deficit happens when a country imports, the value of a country's imports is greater than the value of a country's exports. So the dollar amount of imports is greater than the dollar amount of exports. If net exports is exports minus imports, if I is greater than E, that's going to lead you to a negative number. So if NX is negative, that's a trade deficit. It means a country is importing more dollars worth of stuff than it is exporting. That is currently the case for the United States. The opposite is what's called a trade surplus. It's the opposite situation, so it's pretty easy. A country is exporting more dollars worth of stuff than it is importing from other countries. So if E minus I comes out to be a positive number, right, NX is positive, then you have a trade surplus. So that means a country is an exporter more than it's an importer. A trade deficit means that a country is an importer more than it's an exporter, simply put. So we'll do an example because sometimes this can get a little bit confusing. But an easier way to look at these situations is to imagine that there are only two countries. And so for this, imagine that there are only two countries, the United States and China, the two countries in the world with the biggest economies. So we'll boil it down to really small, simple numbers so you can get an example of what a current account sheet kind of looks like. So imagine that in a year, let's just say this is for 1 year, the United States imported $15 worth of stuff It exported $5 worth of stuff. Can we calculate the United States current account balance, aka its trade balance, exports minus imports? Well, sure we can, right? Exports is 5 minus imports is 15, right? 5 minus 15 is negative 10. So the current account balance for the United States is negative $10. That must mean that the United States has a trade deficit. Now, we don't have that information for China, but we can figure it out. And the reason why this is so easy to figure out is because there are only two countries in the world. So if the United States exported $5 worth of stuff, where in the world could that stuff have gone? There's only one thing, there's only one place, there's only one answer. It had to have gone to China. So the United States exports become China's imports. And if the United States exported $5 worth of stuff, that must mean that China imported $5 worth of stuff. If the United States imported $15 worth of stuff, well, where did they get that stuff from? There is only one option, China. That must mean that China exported $15 worth of stuff, right? Their exports become our exports become their imports. That's how it works. And now we can calculate a current account balance for China as well. So exports, 15 minus imports, 5. 15 minus 5 is 10. And that must mean that China has a current account surplus. Also, if there's only two countries in the world, and you know that this is negative 10, then this has to be positive 10 over here, right? Because we're accounting. When you're dealing with accounting, all dollars have to be accounted for. There's nowhere that they're just floating off to, right? If there's only two countries, every dollar must be accounted for. So that makes everything very neat and tidy. So if you ever want to go into accounting and you like everything in its right place, that might be a good field for you. So let's look at a little bit of a history for the United States here. Since the late 1960s, 1970s, the United States has had a trade deficit. This graph is looking at the trade balance as a percentage of GDP. I'm not going to dwell on that. Long story short, for a very long time, the United States has had a trade deficit. We have imported more stuff, more dollars worth of stuff from the rest of the world than we have exported to the rest of the world. And a lot of times you will hear this talked about as a bad thing. But in economics by now, since we're wrapping up our study of economics, you should know there's really no such thing as good or bad in the objective sense, right? There is. If you look at economics in what we call a positive light, we're just studying phenomena. Um, but you should be careful when you hear a politician or anybody talk about a trade deficit as though the United States is losing and other countries are winning. It's not really that simple. There's much more to it, but I can't get into that without studying the other half of the balance of payment system, the financial account. So if you'd like to get the answer to that question in a little bit more detail, please watch the next video. Thank you for watching this video. Have a good day.